and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and today I have my very special guest, Adam Short. And Adam, I just earlier today, not 2 hours ago, had an interview with another person who, man and his wife, who said that they escaped the NAR because they had listened to your podcast that you did with me, and they just kind of, I think they were already out, but mentally they were still in, and everything that you said just resonated, and they mentioned you specifically. Wow. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, so it is really cool, and it's really weird. Their story is a bit different. They're in another country, and the church they're in probably isn't considered NAR, but their church is building the exact framework of the apostles and all of the NAR stuff they've got, and it's quite a story. So I don't know which is going to come out first, this one or that one. I think this one may actually go before it, but anyway, Good to have you back.
Great to be back. Like I said, Fridays with John, man, it's a highlight of my week. So,
absolutely. We were talking. I was doing some research, and I was digging into Cal Pierce because the whole thing just fascinates me. The God's Generals thing in the NAR fascinates me. Of all of the guys that they could have chosen in that era, there were some really good Christian figures. They chose all the con artists for the God's Generals, and then you have people like Cal Pierce in this healing rooms. They're trying to resurrect the John G. Lake thing, and it's hard for me to look at it. And I don't know much about it other than the research that I have, but it's hard for me not to label it as a scam, which I'm not saying it is, but it's hard not to when they're taking one of the most notorious Christian scam artists of his decade, and they're saying that, I soaked his grave and now I've got the power of John G. Lake. And anyway, as I'm going through that research, I come across a newspaper article, and here is Adam Short talking about the healing homes.
Yeah, that was quite the full circle. And when you texted me that, I guess was it last week? You texted me, you're like, "Hey, is this you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's me." That's me. 15 years ago? I guess it was 2008 or 2009 or something. And there's an article in the Redding Record Searchlight, which is the local newspaper in Redding, California, which is where Bethel is. And I used to live there from 2007 to 2011. And interestingly, that article was part of a project that the Searchlight was doing at the time. They were trying to, as I understand it, this is what the reporter told me, as I recall, they were trying to get more insight into what was actually going on at Bethel, specifically in the context of the healing rooms, which Bethel does have its own healing rooms. You were talking about Cal Pierce, and Cal Pierce is considered the sort of the patriarch, if you will, of the healing rooms movement. And I don't know all the backstory of how the healing rooms got established at Bethel. I think you have a lot of that history that you've researched, but Bethel had, and it still does, to my knowledge, have a healing room that's affiliated with the International Association of Healing Rooms, IAHR. That's a tongue twister. But back to the article. So they somehow, I don't know how they got connected with me, but they interviewed me in the article about certain healings that I actually witnessed firsthand and still know to this day they happened, still believe that they happened. And, one of them was in Mexico City, one was in Redding, and I can think of others that weren't referenced in that article. And so now, fast forwarding 15 years later, I'm post-church. I'm a post-church person now and have been for 13 years, still believe in the Lord, still follow him, but have not really darkened the door of a church in a long time. It's wild to look back, John, on that, that time frame of your life where you did believe a lot of things that you don't believe the same anymore, but yet you still believe in the supernatural healing power of God, the miraculous power of God. But it's like peeling back the layers of what part of this was what part of this was sort of these false constructs that were propped up by people that were money hungry and power hungry, and I think that's kind of some of what you may be alluding to here.
Yeah. It's so complex, right? Because in the cults, you're taught a very black or white reality. It's either true, it's false, you're either a believer, you're an unbeliever. And, you know, it's more complicated than that in real life. I sometimes laugh when I look through the comment feeds because people will attack me having no idea what I believe on certain subjects. And they'll say, well, you must be, one today said, well, you must be working for the Catholic Church. Because that's how they're indoctrinated.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's
so, quite the accusation.
It's crazy. It said something like the Catholic Church was paying me to do the stuff that I do. Another common one I get is that you must not believe in divine healing because you're calling out the frauds in divine healing. And the thing of it is, for them, I get it. I was there. I had that same mentality. You either believe or you don't. It's true or false. But it's more complicated than that. My own father is a person who was in the healing lines, and he claimed that he got healed, and I've got no reason to believe that he didn't. But there are a lot of frauds along with it too. So for me, it's not a black or white issue. There's a heck of a lot of gray.
Oh, absolutely. And this is back to, my wife and I talk about this quite frequently, and it is the both and continuum, right? It's the both and spectrum, and everything, just about everything lives in a continuum like that, where it's both and. Probably the exception to that is the world of electricity, where the circuit is either off or on. I don't think there's really an in between, unless, I guess the in between is if you have a spark that jumps across the positive and negative, the pole, and you have sort of both, you know, it's off and on at the same time. But largely speaking, like, we're in a continuum. And so when you start to peel this stuff back and you're like, well, do I just throw it all out? And that's what I'm wrestling with. I'm wrestling with that all the time right now, especially as it's like every week we have another pastor that falls, or quote unquote falls. I don't even like the word fall, but you know what I mean? Like, the media says, well, another pastor has fallen into sexual immorality. And it's like, you have more layers to face and work through and navigate. And so it's like, in our brain, I think we're wired to just say, well, all that's bad. I just want to let me just throw it all away. Like, this is all gobbledygook, baloney, one big scam. And I mean, to be fair, I don't blame it. I don't blame people 1 second for doing that. I've done that at times. I've said, like, hey, just throw the whole thing out. But are there things that were actually genuine? I'm just asking the question because I'm still wrestling with that myself. Like, I can tell you what my experience has been, right? And encountering the Lord and watching him heal people, and, things that I could not explain other than the fact that God did it. But when it comes to somebody else's experience, or a leader in one of these organizations that is monetizing a structure, they're monetizing a structure. It's money and power. That right there is the part that we really need to scrutinize and examine. And I think that's what you're doing, which I love what you're doing. Like, your work is so important to so many people that are still kind of, maybe they're 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out the door, or maybe they still have 2 feet, in, or maybe they're starting to question or ask questions or consider, like, is there any part of this that's off base? And so I think that's why conversations like this are so important.
Yeah. I try for the most part to remain neutral, because if you truly write it as historical content, you try to avoid your opinion. However, I lean towards the critical, because there's so much of the non-critical out there that it's just, I'm trying to bring balance to the scale. But the problem that I have with all of these things that these guys are doing, they want you to have it, though they call it faith, and I have no problem with faith. You can, people can be believers, but what they have framed as faith isn't really faith. They want you to have blind faith. In other words, I'm going to heal you, and you're going to go home and you're going to still be sick as a dog, dying on your deathbed. You need to have positive confession and pretend that you're actually healed when you're not. And That's blind faith. That's not faith. Faith produces a result, and you believe because you expect that there's going to be something that happens. That's what faith is. And they've switched it into blind faith. And for me, I have no problem saying that a miracle occurred. Things happen that I too cannot explain in some of these movements. But when they do happen, you and I had this conversation last week as well. When they do happen, there is a logical means to verify that it did. And we were throwing out some simple examples, like in the Bible, it talks about the walls of Jericho falling. So in the Bible, this is this great miraculous event. Well, if you were there at that time, there would have been something that happened. God may have induced it to happen, but there would have been something that happened that you could verify, okay, maybe it was an earthquake and the walls fell. Something happened that it fell. And there's a tangible result to what happened.
Right.
Same with, so somebody has a cancer and they get healed of cancer. They should be able to go in with a microscope or whatever, there's the tools, and verify that, no, there's no cancer cells. It did get better. And they would also probably find that there was some sort of I don't know how cancer healing works, but maybe there were some good cells that overtook some bad cells. We'll call it that.
Right.
And the doctors can correct me in the comment feeds, but there's always a way. There's always a way to take what has happened, the thing that you had faith in, and then go backwards. The problem is they want you to go forward, but they never want you to return backwards to verify it. And for me, that's problematic, because if you require blind faith for your religion, it's not a real religion. You have a fictional religion.
You bring up so much good stuff, man. So, and you brought up things like in our conversation last week when we talked about this, things that I had not thought about before from that standpoint, where it sort of reveals some of my thinking that I still have, that's still baked in my brain, right? And so it's causing me to examine, well, what do I believe about this when a miracle happens in a person's life, or like you mentioned in the case of Jericho, in a physical structure like a wall they built around a city and it fell down. It's recorded in the historical record that happened. So what are the signs and verifiable sort of, I guess, marks that are left, or breadcrumbs, or whatever it is? And I think what you bring up about the cancer cells is a great example. I remember, and I told you about this in our conversation last week, there was a lady in Reading, and we would go every Thursday to her house. It was not a church service. It was actually our outreach with BSSM, which is Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry. So every Thursday we'd go out there. It was a group of us. It was this apartment complex. And there was a lady there, one of the residents, and she was older, I think probably 60s or 70s. I'm not sure exactly. And she had stage 4 lung cancer. And so every Thursday we'd go and we'd lay hands on her. We'd pray for her, and we had every, intention to see her healed. And one of the things we were taught at Bethel is there can be measures of healing. And I actually have seen that in my life. I've seen that happen in people where they have a measure of improvement. Maybe it's a 10% improvement. Maybe it's a 20% improvement. They couldn't do this before, but now they can do that. But for her, it wasn't like you could, if you've got stage 4 lung cancer, there's not a way to know if you're progressing or not, other than, to your point, to go back and get another MRI or X-ray or whatever it is that detects the cancerous tumors in the lungs. So we kept going week after week praying for her. And then one week we went and she told us she had just been to the doctor and they did a scan on her and they did not find any cancer. And remember, this is not in a hyped up church service where there's somebody on a microphone saying, oh, you're healed of cancer, or you're blah, blah, blah. This is somebody who, had visited the doctor after there had been repeated times of prayer, and the doctor told her that she didn't have cancer anymore. Now, What I wished we would have done that we didn't do is say, hey, can we see a copy, or can we see like your x-ray or your MRI or whatever scan they do? Doctor in the comments can tell us. But we didn't do that. And that's what I want to mention and highlight as a flaw in what we were taught and what this movement is teaching. And I did not realize that I had this flaw until I talked to you last week. And I'm like, wow, and the flaw is we were actually, this was not like a blatant teaching, but it's like a byproduct, I think, of the teaching. And it's this: if you need to go ask for a scan of, or some type of verifiable evidence, whether there's an x-ray or some type of blood test or whatever, then you actually have less faith than you should. You shouldn't. So we were taught you shouldn't ask for the verifiable evidence. Your faith should be sufficient to know that person got healed, God broke in and did the thing, and it's done. So what's so ironic is, though, wouldn't it be faith, though, to go and get the verified evidence?
It's the difference between faith and blind faith. They want you to have the blind faith.
So I'm making the point, and I credit this to your questions, John. Is that not faith? I mean, the Bible says that faith is the evidence of things unseen in Hebrews. I think I'm quoting that correctly. It's been a while since I've read it. Yeah, it's the assurance of things, something to that effect. It's the evidence of things unseen. So you can see why the teaching is put forth that way, because it's like, well, you need to believe it without seeing it, right? But I don't know. I feel like I'm having a hard time articulating what I'm trying to say. Why is it bad to go ask for an x-ray? Like, if I have a health condition, and I do have a health condition, and I went to the doctor and they did a scan or a blood test, I actually could do that, and they could tell me my levels of X, Y, and Z are high, low, or medium. And is that a lack of faith, though? I think that's the question that we're asking.
Yeah, and I don't think it is. I think the problem is they want you to have blind faith. So I'll simplify it for the audience.
Thank you.
My wife goes to work every day, and she comes home about the same time. She's not here now, and I could take my phone and video camera the entire house and show solid proof that she is not in this house. But I have faith that she's going to come here, and I don't know when it is, 30, 45 minutes from now. I have faith that she's going to come in because I believe she is. And that is me having faith. She's not here now. When she arrives, I could take the same phone and I could video camera her pulling into the driveway. And what they want you to do in these divine healing nonsense, say that she got delayed at work and say that she's going to be an hour later. Well, they want me to accept that she's here when she isn't. In other words, you're healed, go home, you're going to still be sick, but the healing will come later. And so they want you to claim your healing before it actually happens. So that's blind faith. But then they don't want anybody to go back and verify it. So like I'm doing when I'm recording and she's not here, and then when she comes, that's evidence. It's not that I don't believe that she's in my driveway. I believe she's here. Right. That I have faith that she's here because I see her in my driveway. But the way that they frame it, if she's not even in the house, she's not even in the city, they want you to believe that it happened, and they don't want you to verify that she's not here because other people will suddenly have questions. The questions. So check this out. I just thought of something. That's a great way of describing it. Way better than what I said. I was trying to mumble my way around in my southern accent over here, John. You simplified it. So, but here's what's crazy. Think about this. I don't know if I've thought of this before. This is a light bulb. I'm having a light bulb moment right now. And the light bulb is this. Think about Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke. Wasn't he a doctor? I believe he was, yeah.
I believe Luke was a doctor. So here you have a disciple of Jesus, and Jesus was very intentional about who he picked as his disciples, right? Well, he picked a doctor, And Jesus knew full well that he was going to be doing some miraculous healings along the way, I'm sure. I'm sure like he had some kind of idea, hey, I'm probably going to be healing the sick, and he picks this doctor. And it just so happens that one of the Gospels in our Bible is written by a doctor, which, if you think about it, can be considered a medical record, can it not? It's not just a historical record, but it's a medical record, isn't it? Because it's coming from a professional who is an expert in medicine. So my point is the very notion that we can't go look for verifiable evidence is an antithesis to the Gospel of Luke.
Yeah. Well, and if you take it a step further, it's an antithesis to the entire Old Testament, because the Old Testament contains prophets who had scribes, and they wrote down their prophecy before it happened, and then they had the chronologies, like the Book of Kings, etc. So they're logging what happened, and so they've got both sides of the equation. They've got, here is the prophecy, here is what is coming, and then here is, as we see it, this is how history records it. And God doesn't punish people for wanting to look at the evidence that was supplied. Faith is the evidence of something unseen. Back to my example.
That's what I was trying to think of.
I can't see my wife. She's not here. But when she comes, I can certainly verify she's here.
The evidence of things unseen. That's right. That's what it says. It actually uses the word evidence.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, question for you. You mean so the Old Testament prophets didn't prophesy it after the fact?
Well,
and say that they had the encounter before? They didn't do like the guys in the latter rain. And by the way, I didn't make this up, but you know what that's called? It's called prophesying. When people do that stuff, man, where they pull that card, I'm so sick of that card.
Well, so that's the funny part about all of this. And this hit me like a brick wall. You mentioned things that hit you. This was the biggest thing that hit me like a brick wall. A fortune teller is a person who tells your fortune. A fortune teller is somebody who you go to and say, I want to know my future. That's what a fortune teller is. And fortune telling was a horrendous thing if you read the Bible. Fortune tellers are evil people. A prophet is somebody who is a mouthpiece for God. Think of it like, so we're in like a Zoom recording, right? Or it's not Zoom, but it's something similar. So I am speaking, but I'm nowhere near you. The mouthpiece is your speaker that's in your computer. That's what a prophet is. A prophet is nothing but a mouthpiece. So sometimes it is future, but it's more, if you look at all of the prophecies, it's something that really impacts the spiritual lives of the people whenever it's futuristic. It's not, if you read through all of the prophecies, not all of it is futuristic. The Mosaic Law had two sides to it. If you do these things, you'll be blessed. If you do these things, you'll be cursed. Well, sometimes God's mouthpiece spoke about things in the past. Speaking through the prophets, he would say, because you did this, this is the curse that is coming. So the thing that hit me the hardest was we were falsely taught what a prophet even was, because they wanted to create this. It was a scam. They wanted to create this scam that they could predict the future. And for the latter rain movement, that future was, I know that you wrote on your card that your address is such and such, and I know that you wrote on your card that you had, that's a gimmick, man. That's not not even prophecy.
That is a gimmick. Yes, it is. That's a used car salesman gimmick. Actually, it's worse, because at least the used car salesman, at least to the used car salesman credit, right? To their credit, at least they have a car to sell, or what looks like a car. But like these guys that, harvested prayer card information, and now we call it Facebook mining, from the stage, they've got the phone up there on the thing. And, and by the way, I listened to Jedediah's interview with you earlier today, and amazing, like, going through his, his story of knowing his dad, Bob. His dad prophesied over me years ago at his house in Kansas City. Like and to this day, I feel like he read my mail. And now knowing that that information came from somewhere else, you talk about a ton of bricks. That's a ton of bricks to hit you.
Yeah, and the problem is, I see being in the upper sides of all of this and being connected to other people, not even in the same cult, who were in the upper echelons. Many cult leaders have back in the day, they had entire files, like paper files. There was one cult, the person was the file keeper. And they said they knew more about the people going to that church than the people knew about themselves. They had everything.
Okay. And you wonder why there's a connection between those movements and the frickin' CIA. I mean, if they're keeping files on people, who else is keeping files on people? You know, and I don't know how far you want to go down that road, but I mean, it sounds like espionage. And I'm getting kind of out there now, but like, that's what it sounds like. You're keeping files on people and ultimately probably to blackmail them and control them and, you know, take their money and whatever else. But anyway, that's the jaded side of me.
All sorts of stuff. I mean, I've talked to many people now who, through the mouth of, I don't know how many, probably 10, 15 witnesses now. Paul Cain recorded every conversation and he kept the recordings. And when you live a life like this, where you have all of the information about somebody, and the prophecies are so incredibly vague and silly, like they have nothing to do with their salvation, right? It's just ridiculous stuff. He's got all the information. He can talk to other people who know a specific person, and then from the platform he can say whatever he wants, and that person themselves will be like, well, how did he know that? I never told him. Well, of course you didn't. Somebody else told him. And they keep these files because they can get in your head by thinking they're divinely receiving words of knowledge or whatever is the nonsense they call it. But instead, it, like you said, it's just simple espionage.
But and this is back to my personal experience. This is where it's so hard, because I've actually experienced word of knowledge, the legitimate word of knowledge before. And I won't go into the story right now, but it will blow your mind, actually. And it was information that there's no way I could have known this about a random person that was 400 miles away in another state. And it's so I make the point, like, there's all this gimmickry going on here. And probably, and if you were to say, well, what percentage of it is a hoax and what percentage of it is real? I don't know. Is it 80-20? I have no idea. But somewhere out there, there's a real version of this that came from God. And that's what's hard. That's what's really hard about this, is like, you have real gifts of the Spirit that the Bible talks about. You have real miracles. You have real healings. You have real encounters. People encountered angels in the Bible. That actually happened. Bob Jones' description of Emma is different than what we read about in the Bible. It's like it's a counterfeit of what we read about in the Bible. So there's real stuff there, but it's hard because when you've been neck deep in these movements, I still have a hard time with it. Like I mentioned this last time, when I listen to some of these guys talk, it's like you want to believe that what they're saying is real and true. And I still struggle with that. So I don't know if that made any sense, but just trying to like pick apart and navigate the real from the fake. And I guess that's where discernment becomes so important.
Yeah. Well, back to the simplified example. If my wife, say 5:15, whatever time, if she says that she's going to be here every time at 5:15, and I go out there and she's there at exactly 5:15, I can trust what she's saying. But if she says it and then continually is 2 hours late, 3 hours late, 4 hours late, never does what they're saying, but keeps saying that they are, I'm not going to trust what she's saying. But the problem is, because we're in churches and these leaders are saying things that is complete nonsense, easily provable false in many cases, but they're telling you that if you go investigate what I'm saying, if you try to find out whether it's true or not, you don't have faith, so you're a sinner. Well, they've convinced people not to do their due diligence on whether or not they're even trustworthy. And so then it comes beyond that, it goes to a bigger problem. If you can't trust the preacher, then after you leave that church, you have a hard time trusting any preacher. So they actually burn people for religion in general.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. Yeah, I've experienced some of that myself, like in various waves and degrees and seasons. Just the overall like mistrust of church leaders in general, and especially after this past year with Mike Bickle and IHOP, it's like a whole nother round of that. Like just every day, it's like getting slammed in the face with another revelation of just absolute evil. So yeah, it's easy to come away from that and say, well, gosh, they must all be that way. And I've said that myself. I'm like, they must all be bad, but there are some good ones out there for sure. And most of the good ones out there are not on the visible platforms. They're just, they're probably pastors of churches that are small. They don't have a big following and they're relatively unknown, and they're just doing the right thing over and over again every day and following God and helping people, believe in him. So,
yeah. I know some good pastors too, and people, men who have escaped the cult, who were ministers in the cult, and then they left and they're no longer. I struggle to trust them because they were ministers in the cult, and how do you deceive somebody for this long? But some of them, they were deceived themselves. So it's really, even that is not black and white. They could be good people who are just not behaving like a normal person would because they've been manipulated. Have you ever wondered how the Pentecostal movement started, or how the progression of modern Pentecostalism transitioned through the latter rain, charismatic, and other fringe movements into the new Apostolic Reformation? You can learn this and more on William Branham Historical Research's website, william-branham.org. On the books page of the website, you can find the compiled research of John Collins, Charles Paisley, Stephen Montgomery, John McKinnon, and others, with links to the paper, audio, and digital versions of each book. You can also find resources and documentation on various people and topics related to those movements. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can support the podcast by clicking the Contribute button at the top. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the audio or video version that you're listening to or watching. On behalf of William Branham Historical Research, we want to thank you for your support. So we're like 30 minutes in. We're here to talk about Bethel and the Ponzi scheme. I was digging through information, and you gave me a heads up that I was probably going to find it, and I found multiple Ponzi schemes that hit Bethel, and suddenly, that's what made me really fascinated to dig deeper, because in the Branham churches, there was a similar situation, and I'm not going to name the names, but several people had set up a Ponzi scheme, and they were swindling the parishioners. And then you go back, John G. Lake it wasn't a Ponzi scheme, but Lake was setting up what they call a blue sky fraud or something against his parishioners. And I mean, you can go through the trail of history. You can find Charles Fox Parham. He's in a a magic gold from God scam. He's one of the investors in this magic elixir that turns ordinary rocks into gold. So you got all these scams. Wow. And the thought hit me after I researched what you said. People who are in the type of movement that is a prosperity gospel type movement, which the faith healing was and the modern prosperity gospel is, they seem to be more susceptible to this because they take that blind faith that we've talked about for 30 minutes. And lo and behold, one of the first ones I found, they had an entire section talking about the people who are in the prosperity gospel are more susceptible to be duped like this.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you. I have so much to say about this. And so back in 2007, I was a firsthand witness to the Ponzi scheme. And I know you said I say it different than you, Ponzi.
Your redneck is different than my redneck.
That's my accent on the wrong syllable. But so here I am, first year student at Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, moved to Redding. I actually moved back to the United States because I was a missionary in Africa prior to that. And then went to Bethel in 2007. And incidentally, everybody was talking about this guy named David Souza that sort of came out of nowhere. He came to Redding from another part of California. And everybody's like, David Souza, you got to meet David Souza. And so I eventually met him not long after moving to Reading through a friend and who introduced me to him. And so, a lot of us would just go over to his house on a regular basis. It was kind of weird thinking back on it now, but he lived in this really big mobile home. It was like a double wide mobile home with, 4 or 5 bedrooms. I'm not sure exactly how many, in a big living room. And you come in and there's this big, I'll never forget, it's so crazy. There's this big recliner in the middle of the living room, this big lazy boy cushiony recliner. And there's this unspoken rule that nobody sits in this chair. Okay. Nobody sits in David's chair because he would flip out if you did. And anyway, one thing led to another, but the stories you started to hear from other Bethel students, there would be certain Bethel students that would be highlighted, and they would just, unsuspectingly receive a check from David Souza, randomly, like, hey, God highlighted me to you, and I'm giving you this money to help go towards your missions trip or your tuition or whatever. And all of us Bethel students were frickin' poor. Like we were doing good to eat one meal a day. So when that happened, we were in this environment that was primed. Yes, the prosperity, even though it was never called the prosperity gospel, there, every service we're doing the offering declaration where we say raises and bonuses, estates and inheritances, rebates and returns, bonuses, gifts, surprises, checks in the mail, debts paid off, blessings and increase. It's been 15 years since I've been to a Bethel Church service, I think, or maybe 10 years. I can't remember, but I still have that in my head. It's like it's a mantra. And in the Bethel environment, you are primed to believe that it's your destiny to be wealthy. And the whole thing is this: if you can become a steward of what God's given you now, then you can become wealthy so that you become a blessing to other people. That's really, so prospering you in every realm, financially, spiritually, all of the different realms. So here you are as a Bethel student, and in comes this guy, David Souza. And it turns out that this friend of mine that introduced me to him had an MBA. And so, looking back, this particular friend helped him sort of do his business stuff. And my friend didn't know that David was a fraud. He had no idea. Because David was pitching to people 158% return on your investments. He said there was this property project they were doing down in Calexico in Southern California, right on the Mexico border. There was this water bottling plant in Oklahoma you can invest in. So there are all these different, promises that David was making. And really, when it comes down to it, what David did is he saw an opportunity for people who really had this faith, if you want to call it faith, to really latch on to a wealth that they could access. And he saw himself as, man, I'm going to come in and I'm going to take advantage of that. And that's what he did. And he built, I think, over $1 million out of people. I mean, people liquidated their retirement accounts. They sold their houses. They took out second mortgages on their houses, invested their money with him. And he didn't invest $1. It was one big wash machine. And, money came in, and then he would write checks to, it's the classic Bernie Madoff. Like the people that came in the Ponzi scheme the soonest were the people that got the checks the soonest. And eventually some checks started bouncing, and, people started asking questions and okay, there's something not right here.
Yeah, you can't really say that this is a fault of Bethel Church. I'll make that clear right now.
Yeah.
But the framework of doctrine makes people more susceptible, just like the news said. And to prove that point, it wasn't just one time that a Ponzi scheme has hit Bethel. As I was digging, I found there was another one in 2020 that made major news because it ended up in some weird chase where the guy ran into the lake, and he had some kind of underwater scooter that he was trying to evade them with.
Yes.
And so you have two Ponzi schemes hit the same church. And I mean, how many more will there be when you have a group of people that are trained to not critically think, trained to have blind faith instead of faith, trained never to look at evidence or you're questioning your blind faith, you're going to have predators hit it left and right because they have literally set up guinea pigs for the predators to prey upon.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And this is what I wanted to say there. And I wrote this down before we started the meeting. It's really three ingredients here. It's faith, or whatever you want to call this, faith plus desperation plus poverty equals exploitation. And so you had all these Bethel students that were, man, we were so excited. We were so excited to see miracles. And we did. We saw some. We saw a lot of them. Honestly, full disclosure, we saw a lot of amazing stuff happen. But the faith plus the desperation, like we were desperate for God in a good way, but also in a not good way, like healthy, or I should say unhealthy way, like where it crossed the line into desperation, which then it's like you've talked about, you sort of, you check your critical thinking at the door, you sort of don't listen to the warning signs and the flags and stuff. And then on top of that, poverty. So it was really hard to get a job in Reading. People were struggling financially. And so you have this guy come in and promise the moon and heck yeah, you're going to believe it. And so, yeah, was it Bethel's fault? No, I don't want to slam Bethel for it. But it is one of the byproducts of an environment like this where wealth is sort of this promise that, you know, if you follow God, you're going to be a wealthy person. And that is not the gospel. I'm sorry. It is not the gospel. The fact of the matter is, Paul said that he learned to be content when he had a lot and when he didn't have anything. So I don't think that's what we're promised. And so, yeah, that's that was just like one of the fruits and byproducts. And I will say this, though, to Bethel's credit, when this happened, when word started getting out, because David made his way up the echelons of Bethel leadership. And there were even leaders at Bethel that, quote unquote, invested their money with him. I don't know exactly which ones, but I know that some did. And so it eventually got out, and the leadership called a big meeting with all of the students at Bethel, at the BSSM, and then also at the church. And everybody got into this, big meeting, and they said, they warned everybody about David Souza. They said, don't invest money with him. He's fraudulent. He is not a safe person. So at least they did that. But how much headache and heartache and loss could have been prevented if that had been done, before all the damage had been done?
And for me, nothing is black and white. It's all complex. And I'm hearing what you just said, and the good person in me would love to believe that's transparency and that's what a church should do. And it is. It's transparency. That's what a church should do. The critical thinker in me is looking at that thinking, okay, they know the feds are fixing to crack down on this thing. It happened in a church. We're about to be investigated. We have to draw a clear line in the sand that says we are not part of the Ponzi scheme. So
there you go. You're right.
Whenever you look at it, you think, why on earth is there transparency in one particular issue and never in the other stuff?
You're absolutely right, though. That's a great point. And it's just like with the clergy sexual abuse that's come out. Like it's when the heat gets put on that, you get some kind of quasi, statement from the stage or publicly, but they distance themselves from the minister or whatever, and they're just trying to CYA. But that's absolutely the case. It's just, anyway, there's just a lot I could say about that. But yeah. And the feds did come. The SEC in this case, they came in and not only was he pursued, and the SEC went after him, which is the Security and Exchange Commission, a federal agency, and then the Shasta County authorities went after him. He was sentenced to prison for 18 years, I think it was. So as far as I know, he went to prison. Wow. So at least he went to prison for it. I mean, it's more than can be said for some of the other scandals that have happened.
Yeah. It's hard to believe, man. I look at all of this, and again, this happened in the Branham churches as well. The difference is, I don't know that there was that level of transparency, but they may have been just so naive that they didn't realize there would be a federal crackdown. So who knows? Even that is not a black or white thing. But
Yeah.
I look at all of this and I just have to believe that if a church were popular, say there is a large population of poor people. Poor people are often preyed upon by scam artists. In fact, I've seen it outside of the churches. I've seen people who were really poor and they came and tried to sell me multi-marketing schemes. They fall for this stuff, but tried to sell me some ankle bracelet that had magnets on it and said the magnets would cleanse my blood and I would feel better and all of this stuff. It's all nonsense, right? Well, I critically thought about it the moment they said it, but when you're poor and you're struggling and you're thinking, oh wow, I'm going to make all kinds of money on this new thing that's come out, you shut off critical thinking because you're thinking more about the carrot on the stick that you're never going to get. Yeah. If a church were to truly love the poor, it's not just the gospel that a church can help with. The church is the community. They could educate people on the scam artists, and they could prevent some of this stuff from happening. Now, I'm not saying that it's Bethel's fault. Again, this is outside of that. But what they're teaching is blind faith, which isn't biblical at all. So if they're going to teach something that isn't biblical, why not teach how to apply critical thinking and avoid scam artists? Both sides are unbiblical doctrines, so except for the fact that the Bible does say to have critical thinking. So I guess there's that.
Yeah, and I think, the thing that comes to mind here, especially, and I've thought about this the past couple of weeks, actually, and this is a phrase that Bill Johnson said a lot, and I think he still says it, and it's a very widely quoted maxim that Bill is known for saying, and it's this: if you want the peace that passes all understanding, you have to give up the right to understand. Okay, but if you actually go and you read that verse in the Bible, well, not that's not a verse. Sorry, that part that I just quoted is not a verse, but he's referencing the verse in the Bible that talks about the peace that surpasses all understanding. The thing is, though, that if you look at that statement, it's not true. It's not true. That's not what the Bible promises. The Bible promises peace that surpasses all understanding. It doesn't mean that we give up the right to understand. So one of the things that I've learned, I think it was from Stephen Hassan, I believe this is from him, is that when somebody says something very slow and profound, the human brain is more likely to believe it. So just by me doing that right there, by slowing down my speech, it almost sounds like, ooh, it's more true. It's more impactful. Yeah. It's got to be true because I say it with a microphone and I say it slowly and I say it with a lot of finesse. And so I think that's an example of what you're talking about, where critical thinking is, it's like, check my brain at the door and just fill me with, you just tell me what to think. And it just so happens that what you tell me to think is actually not true.
And I go back to the predators preying upon the poor people, selling magnet bracelets. And this wasn't the only scam that I've seen hit a person who is financially struggling. I've seen multiple scam artists. Well, think of this. You have the churches that are teaching this prosperity gospel nonsense. And in effect, they're doing the same exact thing. Give me your money because God's going to bless you with the money. They're preying on the poor people because it's the poor people that are going to give them the money. The rich people stay rich because they don't give them the money.
Well, I will say, though, there actually are rich people that fall prey to it, too. But I'm with you. It's probably proportionally much larger percentage of people that are poor and financially struggling, right? That end up, it's like the old grandmothers that watch the televangelists that call 1-800 bless me now and sow $50 seed into Kenneth Copeland. And I mean, Kenneth Copeland's over there in his one of the nicest jets in the world. I think he's got $700 million net worth. And it's like, in what universe is that even okay? Like, and that's like the ultimate sort of word of faith, like prosperity gospel, movement that's probably even way further down that road than NAR, but still like very much steeped in it.
Yeah. And I've got no problem with a rich person. In fact, I've got some friends who are very wealthy. No problem at all with it. That's, there's a way to do business in the right way and to get ahead in life. But when you're doing it on the backs of poor people and you're getting rich off of poor people, that's problematic for me.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's not that being wealthy. I mean, there are plenty of wealthy people in the Bible too, kings and people like that. But it's not that it doesn't say having money is the root of all kinds of evil. It says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil.
Yeah.
So, and I'm with you, like there's nothing wrong with doing well. But if you're a preacher and you're supposed to be preaching the gospel and you're grifting off of people and you're making people poorer and you're causing them to suffer because of your ridiculous nonsense that you're telling them to sow a seed into your ministry and you're going and buying a jet or you're building a $200 million building in Reading, give me a break.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
It's funny because you triggered me. It's funny. You're talking and I give you things that make you, think outside of the box. Well, you say things that bring back all of this programming that's in my head. And you're talking about rich people and
I apologize. I'm sorry.
No, this was a good one. You're talking about rich people in the Bible. Actually, I can't say this was a good one, but this is a good example, I should say. Okay. We heard over and over, they love to use the phrase from Matthew, 19, I think it is, where it talks about it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to go into the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. And then pass the offering plates. In other words, we do not want you to have money, so give it to us. We want to be the rich one.
Make me the camel that can't go through the eye of the needle. So it's like they're preaching that to the people, but they're the ones that are the camel. You can't freaking fit through the eye of the needle, like. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's the irony of it all.
My grandfather, not the one that was the pastor of the Branham Tabernacle, but my other one, he was a humble, very simple man, and he is a humble, very simple man. The pastor started harping on giving him money in tithes. Every service was like using this verse and others and saying, you're not going to need the money for this world. The kingdom of heaven is almost at hand, Give, and they would use another phrase. The Bible says for the rich to give the money to the poor. Well, my grandfather confronted him finally and said, "Look, man, if I give you all of my money, then I become the poor. Are you going to give it back to me?" And you can imagine the way the pastor reacted. They love getting it, but they don't love giving it back.
No, they don't. And I'll tell you, I get triggered when I see pastors posting on Instagram, they got their bathrooms renovated. They got the most beautiful granite quartz, whatever. Get your granite bathroom, but don't put it on Instagram. You know what I mean? Like people are writing checks to your church and they're trying to, these people actually believe that when they donate to your church that they're doing something in faith and you're going and ripping them off and buying a, $2 million house or however many millions of dollars over here. That infuriates me.
Yeah. It's funny. Every time I have a conversation with you, it's like, I don't know what we're going to end up. First, we start talking about faith healing, and then we go to Ponzi schemes, and now we're talking about bathrooms.
I got something else for you. You got to hear this. I didn't tell you this yet. You can edit this out if you want, but along that same time, when David was pulling his grift, I'm going to say it. I remember Bill talking about the Iraqi currency dinar. I remember Bill talking about that and other people at Bethel. And they said, you need to invest. It's like a prophetic word. You need to invest in the Iraqi currency dinar. Okay. Supposedly it was the next best investment. It was going to go to wherever, go to the moon and back. And of course it didn't. And, all these people not donated, all these people invested in the Iraqi currency. And it's just another example of, even though I don't think they were profiting off of it, it's just like you try to mix prophecy and finance, it doesn't go well. It's back to the fortune telling stuff. Like, it literally is fortune telling. You're trying to tell people to invest in a currency to make a fortune. So anyway, I just threw that in as kind of like a side context there.
And now my head's going back to the CIA direction. Why did Bethel Church need money to be moving into Iraq? That's the real question for me. So I'll dig, but I'll never find it.
I bet if anybody can find it, you can. Let me know what you find out.
Well, this was incredibly fun, man. When I found your name in the paper, I knew we had to get you back on, and then it sealed the deal today when I was talking to this couple, and they mentioned you specifically. They said that you gave them a lot of help. So thank you for doing this.
Awesome. Man, it's my pleasure. Happy to chat, John. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, if you've enjoyed our show and you want more information, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For more about the dark side of the New Apostolic Reformation, you can read Weaponized Religion, From Christian Identity to the NAR, available on Amazon, Kindle, and soon, Audible.